Imagine being swallowed whole by the wild, tossed into an environment so hostile, so unforgiving, that every second is a fight against death itself. The air feels heavier, the horizon more distant, and the sound of your own heartbeat becomes a drumbeat counting down the seconds you have left. Tonight, we're going far beyond ordinary survival tales. These are the absolute craziest, most impossible stories of human endurance ever recorded. Tales where the will to live is tested beyond breaking, and yet, somehow, life clings on. Welcome back to Lore of the Multiverse, where we dive into the strangest, most extraordinary tales the human story has to offer. Here, we explore the razor-thin edge between life and death, and the people who have stood there, staring into the abyss. If you love hearing stories that stretch the limits of possibility, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Because tonight, survival itself is the plot. Story 1: The Rickenbacker Castaways. In 1942, World War I ace Eddie Rickenbacker was leading a top-secret mission over the Pacific when disaster struck. Their B-17 bomber ran out of fuel and crash-landed in the middle of an endless ocean. 7 men floated in 3 tiny life rafts, the salt spray stinging their eyes as sharks circled endlessly. Days passed without a single drop of fresh water. It wasn't until a lone seagull landed on Rickenbacker's head that fortune shifted. They killed it, ate it raw, and used its innards to fish. Every mouthful of food meant another day alive. Still, one man succumbed to the elements, his body buried at sea. For 24 brutal days, they endured heatstroke, storms, and constant hunger, until rescue finally arrived. The ordeal left them gaunt, hollow-eyed, and forever changed. Rickenbacker later said the key to survival was one thing: belief. The belief that no matter how bad it looked, the end was not yet written. Story 2: Julianne Kopka's Jungle Ordeal. Christmas Eve, 1971. 17-year-old Julianne Kopka boarded a plane with her mother, bound for Pucallpa, Peru. Lightning struck mid-flight, and the fuselage tore apart. Julianne, still strapped to her seat, fell nearly 2 miles into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. She awoke bruised, bloodied, and alone. Her right eye was swollen shut, and her collarbone was broken. But Julianne had grown up in the jungle. She knew that rivers were lifelines. For 11 days, she followed the water, wading through knee-deep mud, swatting away insects, and pulling maggots from her wounds with gasoline she found in a hunter's shack. By the time she was rescued by loggers, she was on the brink of collapse. Her survival was a perfect storm of knowledge, grit, and sheer willpower. Story 3: The Andes Flight Disaster. October 1972. A chartered flight carrying a Uruguayan rugby team slammed into the Andes Mountains. Survivors found themselves trapped in a frozen wasteland, the white peaks stretching endlessly around them. At first, they rationed chocolate and wine. But soon, they faced the unthinkable. To survive, they would have to eat the bodies of their dead teammates. Temperatures plunged below 30 degrees Celsius at night, and avalanches swept through their camp, killing more. After more than 2 months, Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa trekked for 10 days through the mountains, their bodies nearly broken, until they found help. The rescue of the remaining survivors was nothing short of miraculous, and the story remains one of the most famous, and most haunting, in survival history. Story 4: Hugh Glass, the man who crawled back in 1823. Trapper Hugh Glass was mauled by a grizzly bear, leaving his legs shattered and his back torn open. His companions assumed he'd die and abandoned him without food, weapons, or water. For 6 weeks, Glass crawled over 200 miles back to civilization. He set his own bones, let maggots clean his wounds, and survived on berries, roots, and the occasional stolen meal from wolves. His journey became a legend of the American frontier, a story so brutal that Hollywood would later turn it into The Revenant. His name became shorthand for sheer, unstoppable human endurance. Story 5: Mauro Prosperi's Desert Nightmare. In 1994, ultramarathon runner Mauro Prosperi entered the Marathon des Sables in Morocco, a 6-day race across the Sahara Desert. A sudden sandstorm veered him 180 miles off course. For 9 days, he wandered the dunes in 120 degrees Fahrenheit heat, drinking his own urine and eating bats he caught in an abandoned shrine. At one point, believing death was inevitable, he tried to take his own life, but woke up the next morning still breathing. Eventually, he stumbled into a nomad camp, skeletal and barely conscious. Doctors later said his body had consumed itself for fuel. And yet, he'd made it. Story 6. Joe Simpson on Ciudad Grande. In 1985, Joe Simpson and Simon Yates attempted the west face of Peru's Ciudad Grande. After summiting, disaster struck. Simpson broke his leg on the descent. Yates tried lowering him down with a rope, but eventually, Simpson was dangling over an unseen drop. Yates, facing his own death, cut the rope. Simpson fell into a crevasse, but survived. He crawled out, then dragged himself for 3 days back to camp with a shattered leg. His arrival shocked Yates, who thought he'd been lowering a corpse. It became one of mountaineering's greatest survival epics, a testament to grit against impossible odds. Story 7. Stephen Callahan's 76 Days at Sea. In 1982, sailor Stephen Callahan's small boat was destroyed in a storm mid-Atlantic. Alone in a 6-foot raft, he survived 76 days at sea. Using a solar still, he converted seawater into drinkable water. He speared fish for food, patched his raft with makeshift repairs, and battled swarms of sharks. At night, he stared at the endless stars, the ocean stretching in every direction. When fishermen finally spotted him near the Caribbean, he had lost 40 pounds, but lived to tell the tale. Story 8. Aaron Ralston's Canyon Ordeal. In 2003, hiker Aaron Ralston was exploring Utah's Blue John Canyon when a boulder shifted, pinning his arm. For 5 days, he drank the last of his water and tried chipping away at the rock. With no hope of rescue, he made the unthinkable decision. He amputated his own arm with a dull multi-tool. Bloodied but free, he rappelled down a 65-foot cliff and hiked until he found help. His ordeal was immortalized in the film 127 Hours, but the reality was even more harrowing. Story 9. The Robertson family's 38 Days Adrift. In 1971, the Robertson family set sail on a world voyage. Halfway across the Pacific, their boat was rammed by killer whales and sank. Adrift in a raft, they survived on rainwater, raw fish, and turtle meat for 38 days. Storms battered them, and the sun threatened to cook them alive. They were rescued by Japanese fishermen, ending one of the most extreme family survival sagas in history. Story 10. Beck Weathers on Everest. In 1996, climber Beck Weathers was caught in a blizzard near Everest's summit. Left for dead by multiple rescue attempts, he lay unconscious for 18 hours in temperatures that would freeze skin solid in minutes. When he awoke, he somehow stood, staggered into camp, and collapsed. His hands and nose were destroyed by frostbite, but he lived. Weathers became a living symbol of survival against the most unforgiving conditions on Earth. Story 11. Yossi Ginsberg's Amazon trial. In 1981, adventurer Yossi Ginsberg became lost in the Bolivian Amazon after a raft expedition went wrong. For 3 weeks, he wandered alone, surviving on berries, river water, and raw fish. He endured insect swarms, flash floods, and nights filled with the roars of predators. When he was finally found, he was emaciated, covered in sores, and barely able to stand. His story would inspire the film Jungle. Story 12. Poon Lim's 133 Days at Sea. During World War II, Chinese sailor Poon Lim's ship was sunk by a German U-boat. He survived alone on a wooden raft for 133 days, the longest known time adrift at sea by a single person. He caught fish with a line made from rope fibers, trapped seabirds, and collected rainwater in canvas. When sharks circled, he fended them off with a knife. When he finally reached land in Brazil, he was so thin he could barely walk, but he had broken a survival record still unbeaten today. Some survived because they knew exactly what to do. Others endured because of luck so improbable it feels like fate. And some survived only by making choices no one should ever have to make. But all of them prove the same truth, that the human spirit, when pushed to the edge, can do the impossible. If you were caught in one of these situations, what would you do? Subscribe to Lore of the Multiverse for more stories that prove reality is stranger and tougher than fiction.